Welcome everyone, and thanks for making the time to join us on today's webinar. We have half an hour, and if you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in the Q&A section that you'll see a button for below, and we'll try and answer as many of these questions as we can further on in the webinar. We have as our special guest today Tanya Harris, Auna's Employment and Wage Support Specialist. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Tanya. It's great that you could join us today, Tanya.
Thanks for having me.
For anyone who doesn't already know Tanya, Tanya's been working in the employment space for, I would imagine, several decades, and is a much appreciated and central part of Auna's service delivery to members, working with our managers in each state and helping you to successfully navigate your employment obligations and to navigate any staff performance management issues. I might start just before we get into the conversation with Tanya, just by reminding members what you have access to as an Auna member for free as part of our employment support for members. Firstly, obviously, you can email Tanya at ir@auna.net.au with any employment questions you might have, and we'll have that email address on some slides in a minute. For example, things that you might want to talk to Tanya about is, how to correctly classify an employee, what penalty rates you might need to pay, or how to engage a new staff member, for example. You also have access to our detailed employment guides, and I'll just show you those. Hopefully these will come up on the screen. This is our employment guide. If anybody wants a copy of that, just let your state manager know. The guide's separated on the side here into separate tabs. And we've got our business policy guide, our employee guide, performance management guide, and so on. And just to talk about those, the business policy guide and the employee guide, we've actually designed them so that you can actually just basically establish them straight away in your business. So if you don't have business policies now, you can actually take that guide and you can let all your staff know these are our business policies. You can have a copy of that guide available in the workplace for your employees. And then there's also an employee guide, and the same applies when you're putting on a new staff member or existing staff members. You can actually get them to look through the guide, and you can get them to sign that they actually understand the guide. So you can actually pick them up immediately and use them in your business. And then the other guides are our performance management guide to assist you with performance managing your staff, our leave guide, which covers all the different types of leave, and then finally an employer guide, which is like a catch-all for all the different obligations. And the guides also include templates, and there's a range of sort of helpful templates that you can adopt in your business. And we will be doing an update to the employment guide later in the year, obviously with the new legislation that we're going to be talking about today. We'll do an update. I also wanted to just thank the lot who have helped support putting together the guide and keeping the guide up to date and making it available for members. So please, if you don't already have a copy or you'd like a digital copy or a physical copy, please let us know. Lastly, the other thing that we have available, which is relatively new, is we now have what's called an assisted compliance audit, and that's available for all members. Unfortunately, it's not a free audit because it does cost a bit of money to have Tanya conduct the audit, so it's $425, and it covers all of your compliance. So it's a desktop audit where Tanya will work with you to understand all the different elements of your workplace obligations, your rosters, your pay slips, all the different things that you've got in your business. And then we're able to identify any gaps in your employment compliance. And then obviously we can assist you with providing you with the resources so you can understand how to rectify any gaps, and also obviously how to fix anything that's wrong to make sure that it's right with your employees. So that's all of the IR support. Along with that, obviously, we have regular updates in our EDM every Friday, and we also have a monthly update which covers all of the employment advice that we've given during the month. So look out for those, and they're well worth printing out as well. So now, Tanya, I might start right at the beginning, I guess, with a bit of a reminder for our members around the basics. What are some essential things every member, must get right when employing staff?
Auna provides, I'll just read through a list of some of them, template letters of engagement for full-time, part-time and casual employees. And attached to those, you've got to have the Fair Work Info Statement, or the casual employment info statement. If you don't attach those, you can be fined. We explain the difference between full-time, part-time and casual and what may suit your business best. Other essential things are record keeping, classifications, conditions in awards, pay rates. Our provide a pay summary and we update it. Usually the pay increases are July. Pay rates, penalties, allowances, superannuation, which is currently 11% for employees over 18 years or under 18 years if they work over 30 hours a week. The superannuation legislation changed last year. Before there was a $350 or $450 a month before you paid, but that's changed. Record keeping in relation to rosters, timesheets, breaks, leave accruals, etc. We advise you on pay slips, what to put on your pay slips, and it's important to issue them within 1 day of payment. We also assist people purchasing a business and taking on some of the employees from the older owner. It's important to ensure that you understand any entitlement that may carry across to you, and we clearly explain transfer of business. We also advise you on what needs to be paid and the entitlements that apply to employees, which is very important. The awards, mainly the General Retail Industry Award or the Shops Award, can be very difficult to understand. That's an overview of the basics.
Thanks for that, Tanya. And that sounds like a lot of things that employers need to get right. And one thing we're going to do just to help you work through that is starting next week, so not tomorrow, sorry, not today's EDM, but next week's EDM, we're going to start by doing a sort of back to basics and actually looking at one of those each week over a series of weeks. So that you understand sort of what the basics are. And we'll start with the most sort of important, simple ones to begin with, things like getting pay slips right, making sure that all your employees have had their Fair Work information statement. But we'll work through those over a number of weeks and keep those available for members after that. So what we're going to look at next is some of the key changes for small business owners that are part of the new Closing the Loopholes workplace laws that started coming into effect last year, and there's a number of elements of it that now come into effect over the rest of this year and into next year to help members with understanding what these might mean for them and their businesses. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen. We've got some slides to work through for you. Just make sure they're up there. So I'll just click to the first one. Yes, I think I will. There we go. So we're going to kick off with at the first changes that came into effect in December. So maybe Tanya, if you could explain these to our members.
Yes, these are the changes that would mainly affect our members. There's a small business redundancy exemption modification. So businesses downsizing to fewer than 15 employees in the lead up to insolvency might still be required to pay redundancy, whereas before, if you got less than 15, you didn't have to. If that's in the lead up to insolvency. New discrimination protections. The new laws have introduced strengthened protections against discrimination for employees experiencing family and domestic violence, changes in right of entry and workplace delegates' rights. The new laws ease restrictions for union officials entering workplaces and providing new protections for workplace delegates. And that's why it's important to get it right in relation to pays and conditions of employment. So that's the actual main changes from the 15th of December 2023.
Thanks for that, Tanya. I'll just flip to the next one. So these are the ones that came in 27th of February this year. So I might get you to run through those.
The increase in penalties for contraventions, that's not applicable to most small businesses. The new compliance notice measures from 27th of February, compliance notices can demand employers calculate underpayment amounts This changes the stresses. This change stresses the importance of having accurate payroll systems in place to avoid potential penalties. Before, Fair Work would calculate it, but they would want to see your calculations once you calculated it. Sham contracting defence changes. The modification in defence against sham contracting accusation calls for a review of contractor relationships to ensure compliance. It's not just good enough to have a contract. You actually have to make sure that they are definitely an independent contractor and not an employee.
And that's obviously one that our members who are newspaper distributors really need to be aware of. And just to, if you've got any questions about your current arrangements with contractors, please reach out to us and we can assist you in navigating those changes to make sure that you are compliant and that you're able to, be able to demonstrate that you're compliant. Then we've also got some other changes, I understand, that are coming in July this year, and then also some more in August 2024. And I think there's a couple there also that our members are going to need to be aware of. I'll just flick to that next slide. And if you wouldn't mind taking us through that as well, Tanya.
From the major updates on the 1st of July 24 is notice requirements for investigating underpayments. Under the new laws, unions can waive the 24-hour notice for entering the workplace to investigate underpayments if it would interfere with the investigation. They want to come in if they will be allowed to come in if they're concerned that there are real issues with underpayments. This change highlights the need for transparent payroll practices and the importance of addressing any underpayment issues properly. And that's why it's really important to have everything in place, have your timesheets, pay slips correctly done, and have all your paperwork. And then it's still stressful, but it's a lot easier, whereas trying to run around getting the paperwork together is difficult. The casual employment and right to disconnect comes into effect 26th of August 24. Changes to casual employment definitions. The new laws outline new criteria for classifying casual employees. Small business owners should review their employment contracts and payroll practices to ensure compliance with these changes. Anna will get out something before then, and it may even be necessary to change your letter of engagement, but we'll let you know that. The introduction of right to disconnect. If you're a small business, you don't need to comply till August 25. If you're not a small business, the right to disconnect will be introduced on 26th of August 24. And the Fair Work Commission are putting more information out on that, and that should come out, I imagine, by June.
Yep.
It will come out definitely before August, and that's right to disconnect once you've left work.
And the right to disconnect obviously has been one that's been in the media a lot, and I know a lot of small business owners have been a bit concerned about. Do we already know what the threshold is between a small business and a bigger business with regards to those dates? Is it a head count, or if you don't, we'll just put that out to members in some information in due course?
We'll have to put that out to members in information. And I think they're going to be reasonable. I think they just don't want people calling an employee continually or expecting an employee to answer emails a lot when they're not even. I doubt it shouldn't really happen. It shouldn't impact a lot on newsagents, because I imagine most employees wouldn't be contacted, Ben, would they? A lot, do you think?
Not a lot. It's really just, like covering a shift when somebody calls in sick for the next day or that morning and those sorts of things. I mean, obviously, in the media, there's been a lot of concern where there's, I suppose, not a lot of information. It's easy to come to conclusions around what it might mean. Hopefully, there's a fairly common sense approach to things like covering shifts and so on. Obviously, it's not really too much of a problem outside of that, but it's basically being able to manage your workforce and make sure that you've got shifts covered. So, as long as that is reasonably taken care of in the information that they send out, I don't think it's going to impact newsagents too much or lottery retailers. And the other one that you touched on before, the notice requirements, obviously there's very, very little unionisation in small retailers. However, we do need to be aware that unions obviously are going to be more empowered after these changes, and may choose to visit small businesses if they think that there's an issue. So we certainly need to be aware of those things, and obviously we'll update members on the changes around casual employment and how that might impact things like the contract that you might have in place for staff in your engagement documents. So we'll update members as those things happen. So moving on, we've also got, lastly, the changes in January 2025 to the criminalisation of intentional, and I stress intentional, wage underpayment. Can you tell us a bit about that new law, and especially what intentional means? It's obviously not uncommon for an employer to make an honest mistake. I noted today in the news, Woolworths have underpaid $1 and a bit million to their staff. So if Woolworths can't get it right, it's pretty difficult for small businesses to get everything right. What does intentional mean, Tanya?
What it means is, intentional means if the intent was to underpay or to not give a break, it's deliberate. Intentional is deliberate. So if you intentionally decided to pay somebody $10 an hour, that's when and if it's proven, that's when there will be criminalisation. If it's an honest error, it won't be. But then if it was an honest error, and then Fair Work, what I find is sometimes Fair Work will audit you, and then they'll come back a couple of years later and re-audit. So if you haven't fixed any issues they've brought to your attention, it presumably would be viewed as intentional the second time, I would imagine.
Yep.
You wouldn't have fixed it the first time. And so if it's not deliberate, it won't be intentional. But what we suggest is get it right. Now come to ALNA and read the ALNA news that goes out. Email IR at ALNA if you're unsure of anything, because it can be quite confusing, particularly with all these changes. And even if like you said, Ben, if big businesses are getting it wrong, imagine the small businesses.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, we've been through this with quite a lot of members already. We have done audits with, I think it's about 30 to 40 businesses now. And you can get it right, but obviously it does require you to use the guides, use the information that Tanya's sharing, use the services that are available to you, and if you've got questions, ask them. And obviously look out for the information that we're going to send through, starting next week, around getting all of those basic steps right, because they're critical. And hopefully once all these changes do come in, we can navigate them. I think it's unlikely that they're going to impact our small businesses as much as some of the bigger ones, but at the same time, we really do have to make sure that members have got it right. I've probably covered off a little bit in my next steps for you, Tanya. I was going to ask you, what would you recommend members do to make sure that they are ready and complying with the changes, and are there any changes here that members really can't afford to not comply with?
We recommend that you review your current employment contracts, and you may have used an ALNA employment contract that's 5 years old for some employees. Contact IR at ALNA or your general managers and get the latest up to date. And for the existing employees, you can give them a confirmation contract. New employees get a letter of engagement, for new employees. That's what we would, and also get the policies, and the employer handbook. Because it's really important that employees understand the rules. If they don't know that they can't do something, it's very hard to discipline them. Whereas all the handbooks, if you give them a copy of the employee handbook, they know the rules and what not to do. Whereas otherwise, they can quite clearly say to you, "We didn't know that." What else we mentioned preparing for the new right to disconnect rules, but we're not sure of the full detail on that yet. And most Downer members, it won't affect till 26th of August 25, but some it will affect in August. We'll get information out. And like you said, Ben, too, access all OWNA's resources for compliance, and the webinars, the your website. You're updating, even you're making your website easier to access, aren't you?
Yeah, we're just going through the process at the moment of developing a new website and hub for members where it'll be much easier to access all the resources. We're hoping to have that done fairly soon, and then it'll be easier to access that content and some of our training as well, the Boost Your Business modules.
And always come to us, because if you're not sure, just email IR at OWNA if you're not sure of anything, and we'll get back to you, because you can get it wrong if you're not sure of the interpretation, and we do find that. I actually think we had some, or is that on the next page? I think.
Yeah, we can talk about
I'm a bit ahead of myself.
in a moment. Just going back to one of your points, Tanya, I think it's really important that members do use the business policy guide and the employee guide. It's a really simple process. You can just, we can get them to you from any of our state managers. You can print them out, get your employees to sign that they understand them, and you're done. You just keep a copy of them in your workplace. And then if any issues come up around performance management or your policies around harassment or mobile phone use or a whole range of things that you need to cover off, it's all there in your policy manual for your employees, and it makes it so much easier if later on you've got an issue with an employee and you come to Tanya. If you've got that already in place, it makes it so much easier to deal with, because we can just basically refer to your business policies. So definitely look out for that, and we might even do a bit of I was just thinking on the fly, we might include that in our sort of top tips, Tanya, over the next few weeks, to maybe just do something on each of those, just to remind people and have a link for them to download them. I thought we'd sort of finish off talking about some of the more day-to-day issues that you come across when you're talking to members every week. But just before I do that, I might just remind everybody that if you've got any questions, because we're doing pretty well with time today, if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. So with those day-to-day issues, Tanya, I've got a couple up there on screen. There might be some others that, are regular things that you come across. So I was wondering if you could take us through those.
You've got to ensure employees are classified correctly. If you're classifying them as a level 1 and then they open and close the store, you have to pay the higher duties, which is the third dot point here, for the time that it takes to open and close the store. Otherwise, you could end up with a back pay issue down the track. It's really important to classify correctly, read the descriptors in the award. What other areas that I often get queries about, if your employee is required to wear a uniform, you must pay a laundry allowance, which is $6.25 a week for full-timers and $1.25 a shift for part-time and casuals. This is under the General Retail Industry Award. Other leave entitlements, important to accrue leave properly, annual leave and sick leave for full-timers and part-timers. Long service leave is state-based. Every state in Australia and Territory has its own Long Service Leave Act, and that applies to full-time, part-time and casual employees, and can apply after 7 years in some states, 10 years everywhere, and 7 years for pressing or other domestic necessity in other states. It varies. It's really important too, if you purchase a business, the long service leave will continue to the next employer. So it's very important to be aware of what happens if you do purchase a business. I'm just looking at others. Really important to contact Downer if you have discipline issues with an employee, and talk to us about warnings. and termination, because if you don't terminate correctly, you could be up for unfair dismissal. And with unfair dismissal, you pay go away money. And so it's really important to follow the proper process always in relation to that. Breaks is another thing. Um, I find that a lot of it's hard in a news agency for employees to have paid rest breaks, but it's really important that they are. I've got someone recently that has to back pay the 10 minutes that they hadn't paid um, for 3 years that they were there, and it adds up. And the unpaid meal breaks too. It's important to roster them so
Yep.
that that they can have unpaid meal breaks. So they need to be you need to read what they are in the award. What we might do as well in one of them is send out a reminder of the breaks in one of those, you
Yeah.
know,
Good point.
advices, and that sort of and pay penalties. Penalties is something else. Some employers get confused with, not realising that there's evening penalties, and so that's sort of they're the main issues that we come across.
Yeah, and I know we've I think that's a really good point actually, sorry, about rostering the breaks where you can, because at least also if you're keeping a record of those rosters, it does provide you with a sort of evidence base if you ever have a claim that those breaks have been rostered.
Yeah.
I think the other one that sort of we've talked about a bit, Tanya, and it's probably not well understood, is like, you know, where an owner has to sort of step out of the business a few doors away to maybe do the banking or something like that. If you've got any queries about, you know, what sort of an acceptable period just to be away from the store but still be accessible to be, you know, still monitoring and looking after the store and what's not. That seems to be sort of a bit of a grey area for some members. So if you're unsure about that, please contact Tanya about that as well.
Because that can be individual. You've got to look at each individual circumstances. You sort of can't put something out and say, "Oh, this is what you're doing. Everybody's a level one," because that person may have more senior. They may be more senior if the owner does step out or the manager. So it sort of has to be looked at individually. But email us at IR@Auna to find out, and we can discuss with you your individual circumstances on that.
Terrific. Now we've got some questions. I've just turned off the slides. Colleen's asked, does the right disconnect apply in reverse? Took me a second there, Colleen, to actually pick up where you're going there, but yes,
You mean it work?
I think she's implying to, as a small business owner, do we get a right to disconnect? Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to your cause, Colleen. The next question was, are long-term casual employees entitled to pro rata long service leave in Tasmania, and what is the ratio?
Yes, they are. What you have to do in Tasmania is look at, you might want to email me, IR@Auna, but you look at the average hours over the last 12 months, and you average it. If they've, and it's continuous service. And so if they, for instance, took 3 months off at some stage or whatever, you can take gaps off. There's also a certain amount of hours they have to work a month. But if they don't work it, you just take that period off. It's quite complex, so you might want to, whoever sent that in, email me and I can send you a fact sheet on it. But they definitely 32 hours in a 4-week period is all they have to work.
Okay. And is it different in every jurisdiction, or is it consistent? It's different.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. So
Yeah.
and definitely casuals get it
Yeah.
if they've had continuous service. So it's very important. We could even it's different in each state. So
Mm.
it's but we could send a link out on long service leave as well.
Yeah.
Different states at some stage as well, because a lot of employers don't realise that casuals are entitled to long service leave.
Yes. Yep. Now, I've got a few more from Colleen. Uniform allowance. If
Yes.
our policy states uniform is optional, however, on request, we will supply at our expense, do we need to pay the allowance?
No, but it must be optional, and it's more or less a benefit, is what you're saying. It's a benefit, and it's optional. If they don't wear it, you can't enforce it.
Yep.
and you've got to be very clear on that.
Okay.
The wording is that they're not required to wear it.
Right. Okay.
We might even put something out on uniforms and laundry as well, I think.
Something out on everything, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I've got another one from Colleen. We have employees who prefer to work through so they can finish earlier. They still take bathroom breaks, etc. Is this okay?
They still have to have rest breaks. You can't not have a rest break.
Right. So you actually need to enforce the employee to have a rest break?
Rest breaks, they're paid rest breaks. I'm not talking about
Okay.
breaks. Depending how long they work, they're entitled to rest breaks. The unpaid meal break, it would
Yep.
depend. I would always say due to work health and safety. Luckily, under the General Retail Industry Award, there's not a penalty if they don't take their unpaid meal break. But it's very important. It does say they must take it within 5 hours. So if somebody works 6 hours and prefers to leave that half hour early, they would need to advise you in writing. And then you respond back and saying, I want to leave half hour early to do, their personal commitments. And then you respond back and they can. But if somebody works 7.5 hours, I think it's a bit harsh to expect them not to have an unpaid 30-minute meal break.
And so if they're an employee who's most likely full-time and they'd prefer not to have that unpaid break each day, is that something where the owner could get an agreement with them in writing that they're waiving their right to have that unpaid break?
I think if they work 7.6 hours a day, it's a long day not to have a break,
Mm.
and that they would have to have a good reason. And you wouldn't sort of want to blanketly, not that newsagents have a lot of full timers,
Yep.
you wouldn't want to blanketly say, "Oh, everybody's doing that," because that wouldn't be looked favourably upon. If they said to you, "Look, I've got to, pick my child up or whatever. This is just a reason at a certain time, and that's half hour earlier than they would usually finish." That would be fine because they would still be getting their paid rest breaks, which I presume are 2. I'm not looking at the award, the 10-minute paid rest breaks. But
Yep.
the award does say you must give a meal break in a period of time. So you would have to have a reason.
Okay.
If there's no penalty, um, you're not complying.
Yep. And
Yeah.
with the paid sort of 10-minute breaks, do they need to be recorded on a roster?
It's best if it would be Fair Work wanting that if possible. And I know it's quite difficult, and it must be a continuous break. It can't be 2 minutes here, and I know this is really difficult. It can't be sort of 3 minutes here and 7 minutes there. It's got to be a continuous break.
Yep.
Quite serious about that.
We might definitely put something else out on that. The other one we've got here is we pay all our 18-year plus employees at level 3. So is this okay for when we leave them alone in the shop?
Yes, because they're only a senior. They're not a manager. A senior shop assistant is level 3, so that's fine because they're sort of supervising the lower level as well. If they had, they might be are they alone, did you say?
Yes. So we pay
Yeah.
all 18-year plus employees at level 3. So is this okay for when we
Oh,
leave them alone in
that's
the shop?
fine. That's fine. Even if, well, depends how long they're alone is the circumstance, which we would have to discuss whether they're level 1. Also remembering you have the high duties, which is less than 2 hours. So you can just pay the high duty
Okay.
as well. There's sort of different options depending on your circumstances. You don't necessarily have to pay the level 3 the whole day.
Yep. And
Yeah.
Colin's just responded to, which I think is clarification for that one about them preferring to work through,
Yeah.
said casual employee who only works 5 hours but doesn't want to take an unpaid lunch break. Do you
5
think that?
hours, they don't have to. I think isn't it less than 5 hours, I think, is the General Retail Industry Award.
Okay.
I'll check that and we'll send that out, but I'm sure it's less than
Not
5
got
hours.
Colin's details. We can
Yeah.
definitely send that to Colleen.
And if they worked 6, they can put something in writing to you because, to be honest, you probably wouldn't want a meal break, if you worked 5.5 or 6. But if it gets a bit longer, they really should.
Yep. That's great. It's been worthwhile having that conversation just to understand that. So that's really, really helpful. So, look, thank you everybody for the questions. That was really, really good. And thank you, Tanya. It's been great to talk to you again about the employment support you and Nowna are providing for our members. And it's really never been more important with all these changes that are coming through. And for everyone who joined us today, please look out for today's newsletter. We've got a big employment update in the newsletter along with copy of the webinar, and just some reminders about some of the issues that we've discussed today. And obviously from next week, we'll kick off the Back to Basics employment tips, some of which we've discussed already today. So thank you for your time, stay safe, and thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, bye-bye.